Question that we're going to be answering is whether integrated or modular is the best route for your personal aviation training situation. And in today's video, we're going to hear from Edward Kjellen, who is a senior first officer. He's been flying for 10 years commercially. He also streams under the handle EdwardThePilot on Twitch, so you may know him. If you've just discovered this video through the YouTube algorithm, hello, my name's Kate, and then Edward will introduce himself later on. But the kind of goal and purpose of this video is to first have a look at Edward's situation, see if there's anything that he can offer in terms of advice or things that he's been through that can help you guys out when it comes to determining whether or not you're going to go the integrated route or you're going to go the modular route. We're also going to hear about how FlightSim helped him out in the sort of early stages of his training, particularly when it comes to VATSIM. And then we're going to break down integrated, we're going to break down modular, and we're going to look at the pros and the cons of both so that we can make an informed decision together about the best one for your particular situation. Edward, hello. It is a pleasure to have you on. Thank you once again for doing this for me. Now, if people are finding this video just purely through the YouTube algorithm, there's a chance that they're not going to know who you are. So could you walk them through, what it is that you do, how long you've been doing it for, a bit about yourself, and, the sort of streaming and VATSIM side of things as well?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Edward. I am 32 years old from Sweden. Some of you might recognize me from Twitch and just the FlightSim community overall, where I stream under the username EdwardThePilot. I have been flying commercially for the past 10 years on 3 different aircraft types in 2 different companies, flying both cargo and passenger operations. And now recently I have, so my current position is a senior first officer on the Airbus A220, formerly known as the Bombardier C-Series, which is more or less the most modern single-aisle airliner out on the market nowadays. It's like a mini A350. And I've been in this position now for 4 years, since COVID, basically.
Perfect. So, you've been flying for quite some time now. What was it that initially made you want to pursue a career in aviation and want to become a pilot?
So I have wanted to be a pilot since I was a kid. And it all started actually with, because I had no relatives that were involved in aviation or anything, which is otherwise fairly common, I guess, for people to get involved. But my dad used to work abroad a lot when I was younger. And since he was working abroad, he was working for the computer company IBM. So we traveled a lot to visit him and stuff occasionally. And also, not only that, but we had we were one of the first ones, at least in our neighborhood, that had a PC at home because of his job. And even later on, access to like internet modem and stuff was also one of the first ones. So with that, not only did I travel a lot, this was also pre 9/11, which things were much far more relaxed back then and less restrictive. So you were even able to visit the flight deck during the flight and stuff, and that was like amazing, like really an eye opener and really inspiring in a way. But also, of course, with FlightSim, it started because since I had access to a PC at home, it started there as well. So I started doing FlightSim as well. First FlightSim I had was Flight Simulator 98. And then later on it progressed, and I got my first joystick for, I believe it was Flight Simulator 2000 or 2002. And then later on, it just grew with the Sims later on. And I got more into it, and then eventually led me on the career path of becoming a pilot, also in the real world.
Okay, interesting. Particularly about the part that, your dad worked abroad and therefore you were doing a lot of traveling back and forth. And that's what sort of sparked your interest for aviation and flying. Because it's a similar story for me. My dad also worked abroad when I was younger, and we kind of took it that one step further. We weren't just traveling back and forth. We actually moved, and I spent a couple of years growing up in China and then a year in Australia. So yeah, it's interesting that flying back and forth and being exposed to sort of aviation and planes from a young age can, make you want to pursue a career in aviation and have a passion for flying and planes. Now, obviously, you've mentioned that you've wanted to become a pilot since being a kid. When you got to that age where it was time to sort of start looking at the different training options and the routes to making that dream a reality, what sort of route did you go? Did you go the integrated route, the modular route, or, a different route entirely? How did you, get your license to become a pilot?
So I took a path that is a little bit more non-standard, I'd say, than the average pilot student. I went through what is referred to as a cadet program or a cadet scheme, which is basically I got my foot into a airline that I later on started flying for as my first commercial airline. And basically, they needed someone to do certain duties in the office. So I did that. This was after high school. And I was working in the training department full time, booking simulator slots, sending a lot of paperwork to the authorities whenever a pilot had a new medical license or passport or something. Then I received that and uploaded it into our digital system and stuff, keeping everything nice and tidy. So I did that, but at the same time that I did this, I did my flight training. And it was done, since it was kind of done internally through this company, I did it through the flight school that they had connections to, that they used as their, basically, they were using this flight school's license in order to do type ratings and stuff in-house. So you need to have some kind of, let's say, educational permit from the authorities, and they went the way through this flight school. So since they had the connections with this flight school, they got a pretty sweet deal with this flight school for flight training. So not only did I work 100% in the office, but also 100% I was doing flight training. So it was quite some busy years. It took around 4 years to get all this done. And the good thing about this was that part of it was financed then by the company. I paid part of it myself. Part of it was financed by the company since I was working for that company. So I was considered an asset, and I actually worked for a reduced salary there as well. That kind of paid off this throughout these 4 years. In my opinion, that was, I don't regret that at all today, because it gave me a very valuable insight into how actually an airline is working on the office level as well. Gave you some connections for the future and stuff as well. So that was interesting. But basically, the training itself was modular. So I went through all the different steps on a modular level. And then, of course, the other part that you can do is integrated. So the difference between modular and integrated is that with modular, you do it on a modular level. You start taking your PPL, then you do your ATPL theory, and then you do your time building. And there can be some gaps in between. So you can start taking your PPL, and then you work for 2 years to gather up a little bit more money to finance the rest part of your education, and then you start. Whereas with integrated, it's very like, it's basically a scheduled program from start to finish, and it's you do not actually get a PPL when you do integrated. You do the stages of the PPL, but you actually go straight on later on, and your first actual license that you get is a commercial pilot license. So there's upsides and downsides between these two programs, so for instance, with modular, one of the upsides is, of course, that you're able to do it at your own pace a little bit more, what works best for your financial situation, and it's more flexible, but it's also a little bit longer in the time duration, whereas the integrated is more, let's say, well-packed and concentrated in a way. That's the biggest difference, I would say. One big pro as well with the modular, in my opinion, is that I think that getting your actual PPL and being able to actually freely go out, join an aero club, rent an aircraft, go out, and you can take your family as passengers on board or your friends as passengers on board. Now, of course, you only have a PPL, so you're not allowed to make money of it, but you can still take them with you for the experience. And for their experience mainly as well, to join along. So that is something you can't really do if you're doing integrated, because since you don't like legally actually have your license until you have your final license. So it's not gonna be until you're basically finished with your flight training that you're gonna be able to do that. So throughout your time building and stuff, I was able to actually went down on, when I did my time building, I rented a Cessna for a week. And this was one of the kind of trips I did, but the biggest one I did, went down with a friend down to, we did a stop from Sweden to Denmark, and then down in Belgium. And then we went down to Caen in north western parts of France, which is next to Normandy, basically. So being a fan of World War II and history, that was amazing. So we basically took a Cessna, flew down there in one day, like 10 hours block in one day. It was totally exhausted when we got there. We had booked a hotel, we went there, and then the day after we rented a car and we went out and looked at all these places in Normandy and stuff. And things like that I would not have been able to do if I did integrated. So, but again, it depends on how you see it, because I saw it more also as an experience part. To do this as a trip. But of course, some people that just see it as for the training, then maybe integrated is like, then you might not care about that. But for me, I think that was a fun part of the flight training as well, that when I actually had my license, I could go out flying with friends and family and stuff. I don't regret at all a single day, like the decisions. In that sense, I mean, it got me to where I am today, where I'm very happy with my job and stuff. However, of course, who's to say that if I took a slightly different path, I wouldn't be happy either, and I might even have been in the same company that I am today. Who knows? So, so like they say, many ways or many roads lead to Rome, or all roads lead to Rome. It's kind of the same here. That, I mean, you can take multiple different paths, whether that's state funded, whether it's privately funded, whether it's some cadet scheme or a sponsored pilot program, or certain countries it's also very much like popular to do it through the military. So, but that's depending fully on which country you're from and how it looks there.
Okay, great. And 100% that all roads lead to Rome thing that you mentioned, I think it is very true. And we can never know that if we were to have taken a different route, would we have ended up in the same position or working for the same company? So yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. Now, let's say, for example, if someone is starting now, they're new to the aviation industry, they've not started their training yet, but they know that they want to be a pilot like you did, when you were younger. Do you think that they should go modular, or do you think they should go integrated? And what do you think determines whether someone should take that modular route or someone should take that integrated route?
So, I mean, this depends fully again on your situation. As I explained earlier, I would say that you have to look at your own financial situation and the practical part of it, how it looks with certain flight schools in your area or in the country that you're from. What they offer, because some flight schools only offer integrated and some flight schools don't offer both, or some only offer modular. So that's more, I would say. The training itself, I mean, at the end of the day, you get the same qualifications. So I would say that that's up to you, how you kind of work as an individual more. Look at the benefits, the pros and cons, and the downsides as well, of course, and then just take a decision based on that for yourself.
Okay, great. And we'll touch on that a little bit later on in the video, actually, where I'm going to sort of break down the integrated side of things, the modular side of things, the pros, the cons. But yeah, from what you've said, integrated does seem, slightly more restricted when it comes to The fact that, you have to complete the entirety of the course, and the only license that you ever really get is that CPL. You don't get the licenses in stages, if that makes sense. Now, obviously, you were on FlightSim from a very young age, and the question that I have in regards to that is, do you think that actually helped you in your training? Do you think that put you ahead of your classmates? How much of an effect do you think being on FlightSim and having that understanding from a young age had on your training and your career?
So I would say that it did have a big impact to a certain extent, initially at least, because there's a lot of advantages that you can get from FlightSim. There's also some downsides to it as well, but I would say that you're able to get a lot of free knowledge just by simple things, just like knowing what an ATIS is, knowing that we measure altitude in feet, knowing what QNH is. You're maybe even able to get proficient enough to decode a METAR, to later on, if you fly on VATSIM and stuff as well, you kind of know the different stages of a flight, what delivery is, what ground is, what tower is, approach, departure, and area control and stuff, and the different kind of normal, let's say, chronological timeline of a flight. You're able to know what the SID and the star is. You're able to know what an ILS is. All these things is like not necessarily complex, but there's so many things. It's so wide and so much information that you're just being, flooded with when you're doing your flight training. So if you have this, let's say, pre-experience, I would say, from FlightSim, that's a big help. So yeah, I would say that compared to the other people that started flight training at the same time as me in the same class as me, some of them had absolutely zero experience at all, like no knowledge at all. They've never done flight sim. They knew barely anything about flying. I would say for sure I was probably 1/3 of the PPL forward the whole initial part of the flight training. So I was at least maybe like a month or two ahead of them, just by knowing all the... So I was one of the guys that did my solo first. I was one of the guys that was finished with the theory first and stuff. And I would say largely that is thanks to due to FlightSim. Now, just because you have done a lot of FlightSim does not mean that you will have an easy time necessarily. And also, it's easy in FlightSim to get false, assumptions and false, like you can be taught things the wrong way as well, and get these bad behaviors and stuff. So take it with a grain of salt. FlightSim is very good to a certain extent, but of course it doesn't mean that you will still have to study. You will still have to do a lot of training and stuff, and listen to your flight instructor. Yeah, that I would say is the genuine advantage and difference overall.
Okay, now a lot of my audience are aspiring pilots. So what would you say to them, or how would you recommend them to use FlightSim to actually benefit their training and their future careers?
So yeah, again, I mean, try to deepen your knowledge, understand a lot of the different terminology. There's a lot of different terminology for aviation overall, and try to look at some charts, look at fly some basic Cessna with some checklist, and try to understand that one, some instrument scanning, and just knowing where to look for what, and then you will already be quite far ahead of a lot of other people in flight training. Then of course, when you start your flight training eventually, then you can use it as a tool even more so to do what we call dry flying, which is basically that you're sitting on the ground and you're just doing the things. And you can do this in your sim, no matter if it's in a DA-40, if you're flying that, or a Cessna 172 or PA-28 or whatever. And you can just sit with the checklist and just do the tasks, kind of. The startup, Then later on, kind of simulate the flight, but static on the ground. Then, of course, you can also do that in the sim as well. Whenever you're gonna go for a cross-country flight, fly that cross-country flight first in the sim, and you get this kind of 3D situational awareness and the kind of familiarization in a way of what you're later on gonna do, or any flight lesson that you're gonna do and stuff. You can practice that a little bit beforehand. So that's a good way to benefit the training, I would say.
Okay, and VATSIM, do you think that helped? Do you think it made things easier as well when you started flying for real?
So I've been a member on VATSIM for a majority of my life now. I think I've been a member since I was 14 or 15 years old, and as I said, I'm now 32. So I think for sure VATSIM has helped me a lot initially to get more familiar with like phraseology. I was able to so this was not the first lesson, but the first lesson that we did fly and had ATC, because I started my flight training on a grass field, actually, my PPL. So there it was uncontrolled, Class G airspace. So, but the first time that we flew to a controlled airport, which I think was like maybe lesson 6 or something, then I was able to handle the radios without any instruction, basically from my flight instructor, and it felt very natural. So for sure, you can get comfortable and you can learn the phraseology and kind of what to say and be more familiar with the alphabet. This Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, the phonetic alphabet, and just general aviation phraseology. So yeah, not only with VATSIM, but as I said before, like FlightSim in general, I think the whole thing as a package gave me a head start, yeah.
Okay, we have spoken to quite a few aspiring pilots, quite a few people that are, just on the cusp of starting their training or are starting their training. And one thing that we've sort of heard back from them is that radio communications and that sort of confidence on the radio is something that they really struggle with. So do you think for people like that, you would recommend them to get on VATSIM as soon as possible and as sort of early as possible to sort of familiarize themselves with that ATC environment?
So I would say early depends on what we're talking about, because VATSIM has a certain standard that you're expected as a pilot to be able to cope with. So have common sense. I'm a controller on VATSIM myself. In low traffic, situations, we are always very open to, helping out. If you write in your remarks that it's your first flight, or you send a private message to us that it's your first flight, we're always very open and helpful. However, unfortunately, I see a lot of people on VATSIM that have no common sense at all nowadays. They sign up and they do their first flight without at all knowing their aircraft, which is in the COC that you need to know, how to operate your aircraft before you fly on VATSIM. And they don't have common sense either. I would like to say, see VATSIM as, have the same view on VATSIM as you would have if you were trying to take your driving license or a flight license as well. You wouldn't start driving your first lesson for your driving license in rush hour traffic, or you wouldn't start flying your first flying lesson, some kind of complex IFR in an airliner. Of course not. You would start small. You would start at an empty parking lot, just driving around a little bit, or you would start, just the instructor doing the most of the flight and go out to some kind of training area, and then you just do some basic turns and climbs. That's basically the first lesson for you on your PPL. And then it grows from there. And I would say have the same view on VATSIM. Don't throw yourself out on your first flight if you are not proficient enough and you're very, let's say, unsure about and nervous about communications. Don't go flying at Heathrow. Don't go flying at Frankfurt. Don't go flying at Amsterdam. Go fly smaller places. Hamburg, maybe some Italian airport like Pisa. France, you can fly some smaller airport. I don't know, maybe like this Paris Beauvais or something where Ryanair is flying. And in the UK, I guess maybe East Midlands or some other less complex airport where it's not that much traffic. You're not causing a big mess if you're stumbling somewhere. And yeah, so I would say you should be at a certain level in order to get going on VATSIM, which is in accordance with the code of conduct that you need to know your aircraft. You need to know a certain, baseline. But then take it step by step again. Take it in a common sense approach and start at smaller airports, work your way up, and then you can fly at a bigger airport, and then you go back and flying at an event, busy event, to a smaller airport, and then you can work your way up and go flying at a big event at a big airport. So yeah, stay away from the busy airport, big airports, and especially do not go flying your first flight at an event, because then you will just ruin the experience for both the air traffic controllers and the pilots on the network, that the rest of them that actually are there to have an enjoyable time and that know what they're doing as well.
Okie dokie. Thank you so much, Edward, for coming on and answering these questions for me. If any of you guys are interested and you want to watch the full interview, it's about 35 minutes long. I've left a link to it in the description. You can watch that completely for free. And, I actually highly suggest that you do watch it because it was very interesting what Edward had to say. And for those of you that are aspiring to become pilots or are at the very early stages of that flight training that you're doing, I think that the perspective of Edward, given that he has been flying for such a long time in the sort of commercial aviation industry, it will really help you and, stop you from falling into mistakes that you may have made if you hadn't have listened to Edward, who has been through that process that you're currently going through already.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and move on and let's talk about integrated and modular and the two different routes that can get you your commercial pilot's license and your frozen ATPL. So it was great to hear about Edward's journey, but now it's time to give you some facts. The integrated training process is, the most simple out of the two. You join one school full-time for 18 to 24 months and they take you from zero to that full frozen ATPL license. Now, just a quick explanation for those of you that do not know, a frozen ATPL means that you've passed all of your airline theory exams and, you've completed your training, but you don't yet have the mandatory 1,500 flight hours that are required to unlock that ATPL license. With a frozen ATPL, you hold a CPL or a commercial pilot's license, and therefore you can't act as a pilot in command or a captain, but you can fly as a first officer for an airline. And once you build enough flight hours, you can unfreeze your license into a full ATPL, which then allows you to become a captain and the pilot in command of an aircraft. But this unfreezing can obviously cost you over £1,000 due to the skills test and the licensing fees. But with your pilot salary, this should not really be a problem. So back to integrated, you don't think about the structure and, it's all done for you. So some of the pros are that it's fast, it's a clear path, everything is organized. But the cons are that, it is expensive and you're definitely going to be in that six-figure range for the price of the course in its entirety. And then you have your accommodation because you have to be nearby. And, you've got to live as well. You've got to buy your food. You've got to pay for your bills. So it's, it's a costly thing. There's also no flexibility. And if you struggle, you are stuck in that process. So if you have the money sorted and you want that most direct route, it definitely works. But if you don't have that, then, I would have a look at modular. So the modular route is very much a build it as you go and, build it yourself route. You go from each license to the next. So you start with a PPL, then you do your CPL, your II, your theory, etc. And you just sort of go step by step and you choose where and when you're going to train. So this can really lower the cost and make things a lot more flexible as you're learning. So in terms of pros, it's cheaper, it's flexible, as I already mentioned, and you control everything. You're not locked into an 18 to 24 month period where you're on this course learning these things. You can space it out if you want to, or, you can do it as quick as that 18 to 24 month period. It is really up to you, and that is one of the major perks of the modular route compared to the integrated route. But the cons are that, no one is there to push you, and you need to understand that process for yourself because there is nobody guiding you. You have to rely on, information that you find online or from other people that have gone through that process already. So it is very much reliant on yourself, and you are responsible for getting yourself from that initial PPL all the way to your frozen ATPL. So if you're disciplined and you know what you're doing in terms of training, it's just as valid, and it's actually usually smarter financially. And you walk away in the end with that same frozen ATPL that you'd have received if you'd have gone the integrated route instead of the modular route. Really though, this decision isn't the main thing, and people overthink it, but both routes, as we've determined here, can get you to that same license, and the airlines don't actually care how you got that license. What actually matters is how prepared you are when you start that training. As you found out today, FlightSim has really helped Edward and can definitely help you if you know how to use it properly. And VATSIM is the network, the online network, where it actually really becomes useful. You're talking to real people, you're handling pressure, and you're learning how aviation actually sounds in the real world. And that is what gives you an advantage when you take those first steps through the front door of your flight school. When you start flight training, radio is one of the biggest weak points for most people. And if you've been on VATSIM, you're already comfortable. I can tell you from my own personal experience that the first time I stepped into an aircraft, the instructor that I had sat next to me was shocked at how comfortable I was communicating on the radio. And now I wasn't in controlled airspace. I was only communicating with an AGCS controller or an air ground, which is a type of, controller or operator that operates within the UK outside of controlled airspace. But still, I knew what to say. I knew how to communicate with that operator, and I didn't need any prompting. So actually, if you are going that modular route and you want to speed things up, VATSIM will definitely help you do that, because if you understand how to communicate on the radio, then you're saving yourself time, and by saving yourself time, saving your spend on flying lessons. So if you want speed, you've got the funding sorted, and you work better in a structured system, integrated is definitely for you. But if you want flexibility, you want to reduce the cost, and you're self-driven, and you know that you're going to be able to get yourself from that PPL all the way to that frozen ATPL on your own, then I recommend Modular for you. But regardless of what you pick, if you're not using tools like VATSIM, for example, to build those real skills early, then you're just making it harder on yourself. Integrated or modular doesn't decide if you make it, your preparation does. And if you're serious about becoming a pilot, get on VATSIM and start building your skill set now. And just a quick one before you click off onto your next video. If VATSIM is new to you, I've left a link in the description to the No BS Guide to VATSIM 2.0 live event. And we host this event every year in May. You can join us live this year on the 30th of May at 6 p.m. BST. On the 30th, we're going to teach aspiring pilots and flight simmers, hopefully including you, how to fly on the VATSIM network, everything that goes into flying from point A to point B, step by step, and we're going to break it down live. And I can guarantee that you will walk away from that live event knowing exactly how to get started and fly that first flight on the VATSIM network. There's also going to be a few special guests and bonuses this year. Obviously, it's our second time running the event, and last time round we had just under 100 people there. We're expecting a lot more this year, so come on, tag along, join the fun, and by clicking that link in the description, you can claim your free ticket now and get access to the private WhatsApp group chat. So I'll see you in the group chat, and I'll also see you on the 30th of May at 6 p.m. BST. And that's all. Safe flights, as always.